Welcome to the Grit Growth Podcast. Commit to conquer, lead your life, leave a legacy, gather your grit, and let's get after it.
Andy, how's it going?
Carson, Matt, great to see you guys as always.
Great to see you as well. Thanks for joining us again, even though this will actually be the first episode to come out. We've pre-recorded your next episode for a future season, but had to do a little backtrack here to talk entrepreneurship more so than life for season one. That's the goal. So yeah, that being said, circling the wagons back to that, wanted to get a little bit of the nitty-gritty on your business acumen and, you know, Fearless Health for one, being current, but also going back to engineering background, you know, making a huge transition out of that field into a completely different field. You know, from the outside looking in, it seems unrelated, but maybe you'll look at it or tell it differently. So yeah, that being said, you want to give us maybe a brief, or not so brief if you'd rather, rundown on, you know, business and entrepreneurship career kind of history.
Yes. Well, you know, I wish I had a simple, clear history, but that just does not seem to be the way life happens for Andy Farina. So I graduated with my degree in electrical engineering in 1985. I worked as a hardware designer for defense contractors, primarily in high-tech electronics, and then did a couple years of commercial consulting for computer companies and helping them design their digital devices to meet FCC emissions testing, because you don't want your computer messing up your TV while they're all on. So they all, you know, the digital companies are good at designing digital stuff, but they were struggling some with high frequency stuff. So I would come in and help them design and retrofit their systems to meet emissions testing through the FCC. So I did that for almost 10 years. And while I was doing that, I was volunteering, doing leadership development and what I would call people engineering. So, you know, to me, whether you're doing high-tech electronics or, you know, or people, you know, they're complex systems. People are far more complex than electronics. And, you know, and it was all about, you know, creating new things, improving and innovating. So believe it or not, there's a lot of similarities between, you know, designing hardware for, you know, the B-1B bomber or fuel gauge testing systems for the C-130, you know, or helping people to become quality leaders or increase quality of life for them and their families and their friends. And then also working as a community chaplain and dealing with people in the spiritual realm, mostly non-religious people trying to make sense of things. So again, complex issues, complex systems, but, you know, hopefully the outcomes are beauty, order, quality of life, you know, enhanced tools, and something our world desperately needs: quality leaders, you know, and quality managers. Two different roles, of course, between manager and leader. And I'm sure you guys could probably define that better even than myself. But, you know, as we like to say, as leaders go, so goes the movement. Or as leaders and managers go, statistically speaking, so goes the company. Mm-hmm. So developing quality managers, quality leaders that care about, you know, really care about people and have good people skills besides their technical skills and productivity, to me, that's really crucial. And so, you know, doing volunteer work for many years, I found that when you volunteer coach people and you volunteer consult people, people don't take it as seriously. And I had a number of entrepreneur friends who kept saying to me, Andy, your stuff's great. You need to monetize this and you need to charge people. And I was very reluctant to do that because I'm not a business guy, or at least I wasn't. And something got dumped in my lap, and somebody, a company asked, how do we hire you to come in here and help us with these things? And that was kind of the final straw. Like, I need to do this. This is a way for me to help people. And when you start charging people, people take it a lot more serious. They show up with pen and paper and they do their assignments and things like that. Not everybody, but a lot more than when you're doing it for free.
Right.
And so I learned a very valuable lesson, and I do very little for free now, unless it's, a sincere emergency or something like that, because people just don't take it seriously. But when they have skin in the game, time and money, they get better results. Mm-hmm. And I am about results. That, to me, degrees are nice. I can show you shelves of books, research I've done, apprenticeship programs for 4 years in leadership development on two different occasions, 2 years each, with top leaders. And all that means nothing if I don't get the people who are relying on me tangible quality results. So that's it in a nutshell. I hope
like
that's
it.
a good starting point.
That's perfect. I like it a lot. There's a lot there. So one thing I think has been a common theme we've talked to a lot of people about is getting over a hump in your career path, or getting off a plateau. And that I think it would be an average to say 5 to 10 years that it takes people to do that. But you just mentioned, and correct me if I get the timeline wrong, but you did the engineering for approximately 10 years before this transition happened, where instead of, say, becoming an expert in the engineering field, which you may have been, and taking that on and continuing on and to the fullest extent of whatever it might have been, you've had this opportunity thrust upon you and use that as a pivot point and transferred those skills, right? Mm-hmm. So that's interesting to me. I think a lot of people maybe burn out somewhere in that 5 to 10 year period that it takes to become an expert in something. And was that a motivator for you at all, burnout and causing you to switch gears, or was it more of an opportunistic?
No, I don't think you leave something. I think you leave to go to something. So I was on parallel career paths, which I don't recommend because it's not for the faint-hearted. Because I was working full-time as an engineer, and I was also working 5 days a week almost as a volunteer in coaching, consulting, and spiritually advising. At that point, it was college students primarily. That's where I started my volunteer work, because my college years were such a pivotal point in my life. I was on those two parallel paths. So I was testing both out at the same time. And my goal was not to leave my engineering profession until my boss could look me in the eye and say, we're so sorry to see you leave. You're welcome back anytime. So it definitely wasn't burnout. It was the fact that I had a passion for engineering and electronics, but I had a greater passion to see people, thrive, to see people become the best versions of themselves, and to solve those problems instead of electronics problems. And innovating electronics, I prefer to innovate people. So for me, it was following the greater passion. And when opportunity knocks, and it's in an area of passion, the only thing that's going to stop you at that point is fear. And I think fear is ruining so many people's lives. And hence why I named my company, Fearless Health, because I want people to be able to overcome fear, to become who they want to become. And, for lack of sounding kind of corny, to really live the dreams they want to live. Like, it's doable. But fear stops most people. Fear of the unknown, fear of what if I don't have what it takes? What if I fail? And, I just want people to get past fear, and I want to help people get past their fears to become who they want to become and do what they want to do. So that's how I did it. The opportunity came knocking. I initially had to take a 40% pay cut, which was, another big risk to start where I was starting. And I did it. And I can say I probably lived better during those years and now than I did even when I was making a lot more money as an engineer. And, so fear of the unknown, I think, is stopping a lot of people from becoming, or for one of my favorite things, daring greatly, Dare greatly, go for it. If it doesn't work, at least you learn. And if you have skills, you still have those skills, so you can go back around. Yeah, it hurts, it's inconvenient. I had 5 kids too. Well, at that point, when I made that jump, where were we in the lineup? We had at least 2 at the time when I jumped, knowing we were going to have more. So it was a big jump. I still kind of laugh about it.
Yeah, 5 kids is a big plan.
You make it sound like it was like opportunity just presented itself. And you had this passion. It's like, okay, opportunity knocked. But I'm sure it couldn't have been that simple. Like you're just talking about, you got 2 kids, you're thinking about more. I mean, really talk us through what did you do to overcome the fear? What gave you the courage? What allowed you to dare greatly?
That's a great question, Matt. So it's never simple. It's always messy. Let's just get that principle out there. If you're looking for simple or cleanliness, you don't want to be an entrepreneur. I've heard many entrepreneurs say that to be an entrepreneur or to start a business, or however you want to put it, you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable, because it is extremely uncomfortable. However, I have a value on self-awareness. And during this season where I was working as an engineer and doing leadership development on 2 college campuses at the time, and really growing in that arena, I was weighing out all along, like, where did my greater passion lie? And I like to say every decision you make is not a decision about what you're going to do. It's about who you want to become. So I think the way you overcome the fear is there's a couple key factors. Practical, what I would consider non-negotiables, okay? And, I don't know if I'm an expert or not, so I can't answer that. I'm just one man. So the audience can decide if they'll agree with this or not, and I'm comfortable with that. But I think you have to have a vision of who you want to become. What kind of man, woman do you want to become? Because the decisions you make determine that. So I had a vision of who I wanted to be. And I had to, so that was one key thing in making the decision. Okay, money's not the most important thing in my equation. It was, who am I becoming? And is this path going to lead me to become who I want to become? The second thing is, if you're married, you better have a wife that's on board. because she's going to pay a big price in this whole thing. And so are your kids. And you're not going to make it if it's not a team. And you can't force them to be on board. So that was another practical thing. My wife was very much on board with me in the direction that I was going. And that helped me to overcome fear of, well, what are we going to do about bills and how are we going to live and so on and so forth. So vision, who you're going to become, wife and kids on board. My kids were young, so they didn't know any different, but my wife was on board, and that was the key player. And then I think everybody has faith in something, faith in yourself, faith in God, whatever you want to call it, but everybody leans on, trusts in something. I had a sense that the direction I needed to go was this opportunity that presented itself at a very unique time came after years of asking God to lead me to where he wanted me to go. And I'm not trying to force my religious views on anybody, my faith views on anybody, but I just, part of my overcoming the fear was I believed that God wanted me to go this direction, and I had to go that direction to find out, as I like to joke about and say, was this God or was it indigestion? And I know that sounds a bit irreverent. My religious friends will get mad at me, but I was like, let's be realistic here, guys. Just because you have a feeling about something does not necessarily mean it's always like a higher power. You need to be prudent and discern. So I was being aware of what my passions were. I was being aware of what my family status was. I was being aware of what I wanted to be like and who I wanted to become, what kind of man I wanted to become. And then I had to, analytically, like a good little engineer, look at the pros and cons and say, okay, also, let's speak practically here. How long can I last on 40% less salary? So that gives me a timeline to where I need to succeed by some crossover point, correct? So coming into this endeavor, I had been saving cash for an emergency fund to make sure I had a backup. So these are the important things. These are the practical things that help you overcome your fears. It's a lot easier to be courageous with your decisions when you have 3 or 6 months living expenses sitting in the bank, because it gives you some time, right, to make it work. Or, I've got to go back into my old job, or I got to go get a new job. So those are 4 practical things that help me overcome the fear. And you're very astute in your observation. It is not easy, and it is not simple, and it's messy, and it takes some focused effort for sure.
Yeah.
So it's 3 to 6 months in, and you're running out of cash. What are you thinking?
Well, the good news was I wasn't running out of cash.
Woo!
And so then it worked in reverse. I wasn't running out of cash. Mama was happy. I was moving in the right direction of my vision of who I wanted to become. And, I had a sense that things were good. Things were good. Now, that path was not an easy path. And it was actually the role I took, the first role, did not end very well. I made some significant mistakes. And that after 6 years, I realized, this isn't working so good. I need to do another pivot, and not a full pivot, but I need to recreate a little bit about who I am, because right now it's not working as well as it could. So I went through another adjustment period, and that's when I moved to Gainesville in 2000. And that was a whole new endeavor.
All right. Well, before we trek off into that endeavor, I got a question for you. So, did you always have this vision of your future self that you were working towards? And do you still have that? Do you still maintain some format of that now that you're working towards?
Excellent question, Carson. Yes, I was, the vision changes as time goes on, but the core of it stays intact. And so that vision started when I was in my early 20s. And next week I turned 60. And I would say I'm still moving in that direction. And the vision is still strong. I would say the last 10 or 15 years have probably been the hardest of my life. And I don't want to get in a comparison game. And I know lots of people have had a much harder life than mine. But I would say much of my life has been pretty difficult. And the last 10 to 15 years have been brutal. And I think the vision keeps carrying you forward. And the support of my wife, who we've, been going steady now for 36 years, that's been critical. Not easy, but critical. And also re-engaging with the vision consistently. Like, all right, am I moving in that direction? How would I define it in the language of today? Are these really my values? Let me look at how I spend my money. Let me look at how I spend my time. Let me see how I treat the opposite sex. Those three metrics, I think, really define the type of man you're becoming. Not only how you treat the opposite sex, but also how you treat the little guy. That may not be a great way to say it, but do I treat, the checkout girl at Publix with the same dignity and respect that I would treat some bigwig in a company?
Right.
Because how you treat people really defines the kind of person you are. But I've made so many mistakes, and those who know me would be laughing right now, for sure. But at least I'm growing and I'm moving in the direction of the vision. And I'm a lot better now than I was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And that's the goal. The goal is progress. Always progress. Never perfection, because we never get there, but progress. So the vision is still strong. It is always challenged. And I would say it doesn't get any easier. There is no easier. As the SEALs like to say, no easy days.
Right.
There's no easier. My life has never gotten easier. It's gotten better, but not easier.
Great distinction.
What's gotten harder?
We could have a massive podcast about that. Let me see if I can answer that very good question concisely and at the core of meaning instead of rambling. So all of us that are in leadership roles have primary leadership styles. And I will say that I don't know if this is true or not. I believe it's true. And I think other leadership development guys would potentially agree. Most leaders I'm around want to use directive leadership as their number one tool. I tell you what to do and you do it, right? That would be, in a perfect world, that'd be awesome. But it's the easiest style of leadership. And it's also the one that's least effective unless you're in an absolute crisis. If you're on the battlefield, you're not going to form a committee on, where to take cover. You just directive leadership. If you're in a fire, you're not going to, do a conference call on how to get out of the building. The guy who knows steps up, directively leads. Okay. Mm-hmm. But if directive leadership is all you got, you're not a very good leader, because it just doesn't get you very far unless you're in a crisis. So the problem is my personality, my temperament, my Myers-Briggs leader of leaders, the ENTJ, is all about directive leadership. So part of the challenge for me is failing over the years and having to develop my other areas of leadership that are more nuanced, that are more people-oriented, that are more caring, which never came easy for me because I did not grow up in a very nurturing, caring environment. And so part of the problem is you have to be willing to change, and you have to have a path to change, and you have to have a supportive environment to change in. Okay, so that's part of the difficulty. Each one of those things they don't just magically come. You have to find them, develop them, put yourself in those situations, and often that puts you on very uncomfortable. So that's one issue that makes it very hard. The other issue is, as you guys know, women are very different than men. And you take two people who are entirely different, you put them in the same house, and you give them a bunch of kids who are also very different, and nothing makes sense. And you have to maneuver those waters. And every season that your kids and your wife go through, the game rules all change. So I had to constantly be evolving my relational skills, evolving my parenting skills, my leadership skills. And that's just hard. Again, very uncomfortable. And with the acceleration, I do a lot of cultural research, with the acceleration of cultural changes we're dealing with, I would say if you're not evolving your skills every year, 1 to 2 years, you're already behind. So it means there's a certain amount of vigilance, there's a certain amount of focus. You need to keep the vision clear, you need to keep the goals clear, and you need not to give up. You need to find ways. It's like late in ultra races. You have to find ways to amuse yourself, to keep yourself happy and focused, because we joke at our house. They say if mom comes unglued, the kids all run to dad. If dad, they're older now, so they don't run to me. They're all bigger than me too. But if dad comes unglued, everybody runs for the hills. So it is important for the leader at that time, sometimes it's mom, sometimes it's dad, to hold it together. And so that's part of the hard thing, is you've got to be self-developing so that you can handle the difficulty of all these difficult things that are coming. And so when your kids do things, that hurt, or your spouse does things that hurt, or you hurt them and now they're mad at you, or you blow it at work, you blow a project, you make a big mistake, customers, clients, or owners are really PO'd at you, how are you going to handle that on a consistent basis? How do you become a trustworthy person? Whereas Andy really blew it there, but I trust that guy. He really cares, and he'll make it right. And so that's one of my goals. That's part of my vision, is I don't want anybody to be able to point at me and say, Andy didn't make it right. I'll blow it, but I'll make it right.
Yeah, it's funny you say that about the combination of two humans and then procreating more humans. I got an email from a guy I follow, Dave Blanchard, this morning, and it is exactly that. It's humans are infinitely complex. Then we multiply those complexities together, and then when you have kids, that's exponential growth. Now you got infinite times infinite to the infinite power every one you add, right? So there's literally nothing else more complex than that. And
yes,
it's mind-boggling to think about the nuance of that. But anyways, so I really want to hit on this vision thing. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I think it's really critical, and it seems like it's made an immense difference for you. So when you reevaluate, and you stay vigilant on your path to continue to develop yourself, is that like on an as needed basis? Is that an annual calendar meeting with yourself where you shut the world out and deep dive into your own brain for 8 hours? What does that process look like for you?
That's excellent, because I haven't met too many people that really focus on this, and I feel like it's I know so many great people, and I think they could be that much greater if they would do some of this, you know. So it's not as difficult as you might think. So I'm going to keep it really practical, because when we start talking about infinite times infinite, it can feel a bit overwhelming. And I did single board computers for part of my stretch. I designed single board computers for military radios with encryption and decryption capabilities, with the highest level of electronics available, which were much better than commercial electronics. And I was working in the nanosecond world. And let me tell you, people are way more complex than that. So, but there are certain principles that are consistent. Simple things like people want to be seen, people want to be heard, people want to be understood, people want to feel like you care and feel like it's sincere, not like you're, as I've heard young people say, you're finessing. Which for me as an old schooler, I would say that sounds a lot like manipulating. I don't think I want to do that. Right. No disrespect that some people may see finesse very differently, but I laugh about it when I'm talking with young people about it. But here's what I do. I keep some very basic foundational values in focus. I keep some basic foundational principles in focus. Value may be not quitting, or value may be it's more important to love you than to make you agree with me. Certain basic principles that reflect the dignity of every human being. And again, I'm far from perfect, not even close, but it gives me a stake in the ground. When I'm not sure what to do, I have these basic values, basic principles, and a basic end game, the classic begin with the end in mind, Stephen Covey. Where do I want to be? The end is getting closer for me. Especially with cancer this, last year, it became really real. I'm not invincible. Things do go wrong. So you want to begin with the end in mind. You want to have these basic values, basic principles, like this is what I'm about. And then I have some basic habits that I practice each day. And again, I'm not perfectionistic about it, even though I do struggle with perfectionism. I say I'm a recovering perfectionistic person, a recovering workaholic. But, I have some simple habits that I stick to every day. And if I miss a day, it's okay, but I don't want to miss 2 days. Not 2 days in a row. That's no good, because then you start to lose the habit. Every time you skip a day, it makes it easier to skip another day. So I don't skip. I try not to. You'll see that in my training. If I have a training plan over a period of 16 weeks, if I miss one training session, that's probably the most I'm going to miss. Like it's about consistency, because whenever I meet older leaders that I highly respect, I ask them one question almost always. I ask the question, how do you finish this life well? It's one thing to start well, but you've heard, you see a lot of older people and they say, oh, they're grumpy and they're this or they're that. I don't want to be that. That's not in my vision. So I ask them, I say, well, how do you finish your life well? And one of my childhood heroes who I got to spend time with later in life, I asked him the question and he said, you finish well by living each day well. And that was it. That's all he said. And it has stuck with me that was 1994. So that's going to be 30 years in a couple years. It stuck with me. So live each day well. So you have where you want to be at the end, what the end of your life is going to look like. You have some values that you've embraced. And I looked at my life. Every year at the beginning of the year, I do an evaluation of the previous year and I do a plan for the next year. And I spend 3 days really focused on it. And I even often will skip eating so that I can be mentally clear and spiritually in tune in my belief system with God. And then I come up with a theme for the year that keeps me focused. But then it comes down to what habits am I going to conduct every day? Maybe take one day off a week or something like that as a rest day with some different habits, out of the ordinary habits. And that's pretty much how I do it. And I'm happy to give examples. I'm happy to tell you more about it, but I do believe each person has to decide what's going to be important to them. And I along the way, one of my high values, I want to love people well. I've never been good at it. I'm inherently selfish, and love to me is the process of meeting needs with no strings attached. So I want to meet the needs of others with no strings attached for their benefit. And that's a high value. So I have to ask myself each day, okay, how am I doing that today? What's on my schedule that I'm doing that? What am I doing to make sure that I won't quit no matter how hard things get? And I have mantras and I memorize phrases that keep me stirred in my soul and in my heart, that keep me fired up and motivated, or keep me laughing if it's a funny mantra. So I have funny mantras, I have serious mantras, I memorize quotes, I memorize key verses out of ancient texts like the Bible and things like that. And all those things feed me day to day. When they're in your brain, you can call them up anytime. So, that's some of the things I do to fuel all that. I've been rambling for a while. Is that clear?
There's so much gold in there. It was great. It was perfect.
These are the lessons I wish somebody would have taught me like 40 years ago. Could have saved me so much trouble. They're not new with me, but I just wish I would have had them sooner. I could have saved my wife, poor Suzanne. I could have saved her a lot of heartache.
Yeah, well, hopefully we will be saving someone that when they hear this.
I hope so. I hope they can find a little nugget there. And just the key thing is, don't try to do it all at once. Pick one thing and go after that. And that will get the ball rolling. And as you know, in physics, the coefficient of static friction is far greater than the coefficient of kinetic friction, or in thermodynamics, or I forget in what science field, but a body in motion, you want to keep it in motion.
Stays in motion, right?
Yeah. So go ahead and pick one thing, focus on that, start working on that, and get the ball rolling. And then you can always go back and watch the podcast again and get another one, or whatever you want to do, or somebody will come up with something way better. But always find one thing. That's another principle I have. Whenever I sit in all kinds of teaching, I find one thing to do. And if I don't find one thing to do, I don't care how great the teaching was, it didn't have an impact.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. What about when it's hard to narrow it down to just one, though, right? That's the flip side of vigilance.
Well, that's what grit growth guys do, right? They make the hard choices.
Mm-hmm.
Got to make the hard choices. Fear stops you from picking just one. Fear of missing out. You're not going to miss out. Try it. Put a time limit on it. Try one thing. If this doesn't make a difference in 2 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever you think is prudent, then I'm going to go to the other one.
Mm.
You're always testing. You're always in action. You're not just sitting around thinking, philosophizing. That fits in some circles, but not for the entrepreneur, not for the quality leader. You got to be a ball in motion.
Yeah.
So do you have a formula per se, or a split? So we kind of talked about the 3 days of reflection and then looking forward over the year, right? So at that point in time, you're kind of in theory. There's an action of I guess determining what the next year is going to be for you. But what is that kind of balance between action and reflection? There's got to be the time when you pick the one thing to move forward with, But do you kind of have I don't want to say division, but kind of what's that right balance for you? And I'm sure it's different for other people, but you're right. You got to keep pushing something forward. The ball's got to be moving forward. You've got to kind of, at the same time, you've got to pause and reflect so that you're not just going in a circle.
Absolutely. I like to look back some at the end of the day, but I'll tell you something that when I was in leadership development cycles, where I was really focused on being developed as a leader, those two-year cycles that I went through with higher level leaders, one of the things that was said that really caught my attention is one of the leadership development guys said, the best leaders take 10% of their work schedule and put it towards reflection. So if you're working a 50-hour week, that's an hour a day, 5 days a week. That's a fair amount of reflection.
Mm-hmm.
I must not be a great leader because I have not taken that much reflection, but I take a lot of reflection. For me, trail running in the woods, I spend a lot of time reflecting during that time. Mm-hmm. I have some of my best ideas. So I tend to, because there's only 24 hours in a day, I tend to integrate life quite a bit. Where, if I'm going to go out and run distance, which I love to do, and I do that most of the time 5 days a week, sometimes 6, I want that time to be more than just running. So that's often for me a time of reflection. The other thing that I didn't mention that's really important, really, really important, and this is something that's really hard too, because a lot of people don't have enough of these kind of friends. It's not like you need a whole bunch of them, but most of us have a spouse and they're eager to answer this question. But I ask my wife, my kids, and my closest friends questions about me. Like, how am I affecting you? How am I doing with this? And that saves me many hours of reflection because, we all have blind spots. And the people around us can often see things that we don't see. So you could reflect for 10 hours in a day and still never see it. But your spouse or your kids, my kids are all older now. They're 20 to 31, and they're eager to give me feedback. I get lots of good feedback from them, and they talk about what I was like before and help me have insight into how I am now and how I've changed. So get a couple people that you trust, that know you, and ask them, about your leadership style. How do I affect you? Do I motivate you? It's a humbling question to ask because you don't always like the answers you get. And it's really hard with your spouse, but really important because it means so much to you what your spouse thinks of you. And often they don't answer the way you had hoped because you're a little bit idealistic. And I tend to give myself a little more credit than I deserve. And Suzanne is good at kind of giving me a little more reality. So I think that's an important part of reflection, is ask people you trust, how am I doing in this area? What do you see? And take their feedback to heart. Don't poo-poo it. Don't write it off. Take it to heart, do something about it, and see if you get different responses from other people. Hopefully better responses, right? They could be wrong, but most of the time they're dead nuts on, I found. So I think, you can do something as simple as I try to do, and this is one I do more days than not. Well, to be honest, it's probably 50-50 at this point because I'm developing this habit. But I try to take about 5 to 10 minutes at the end of every day and do some reflection.
Is that like a journaling kind of exercise, or?
Well, I do reflection in the morning to start the day. I have a time I spend where I read and I pray and I reflect. And I am not an avid journaler. I am trying to improve, even though I have a shelf of notebooks full of notes. So maybe some would say I'm an avid journaler, but to me, I haven't gotten to the point where I'm journaling every day, but more days than not.
Mm-hmm.
And I go back and I read those reflections, and I kind of surprise myself sometimes. I was like, wow, where did that come from? It couldn't have been me, because
forgot about that little tidbit.
Yeah, that's pretty insightful. Wow.
I need to memorize that one.
Yeah. And I do that.
Yeah.
So I think you can. I think it is important to put paper to pen, because you retain like 5% of what you hear and about 10% of what you see. But if you engage the tactile, it goes up like to 35%. And if you engage two senses simultaneously, it goes up to like 65% retention. And you retain 100% of what you memorize.
Yeah.
How about that?
Right.
So journaling and memorization, I think, are pretty key.
Well, Andy, we're coming up on 5, and you and Carson can keep going here, but I've got another meeting I got to jump to. At the same time, I wanted to kind of reflect on what I've heard from you today, and really kind of started with, when making that change in your life, it was about having the confidence to do so, but making sure that you didn't let fear take control of your life. You kind of sat down, you created that plan in your analytical brain to then move your feelings and your passions forward. And in reality, us humans are just big electronic devices. We run on electricity when it's all said and done too, right? So maybe it wasn't that huge of a career change for you, but that was awesome. Having that courage, overcoming that fear, not letting fear get in the way, daring greatly, not being scared to fail, but learning when you do, and carrying that lesson learned forward. But part of that courage comes from understanding who you are, the self-awareness, and where you want to be, and having that vision of the type of person, the types of things you want to do, then gives you that courage, which I think was awesome. I'm with you on that all the way through this, but in particular, I don't think people define themselves well enough for what they want to do or set goals for themselves on where they want to be. But you talk about that goals and that visioning and spending time on an annual basis, really going over that. But now also, again, on that daily, spending the time, running, those are reflection times for you to, are you living the life you want to live? Am I living the best life I can every day? Because that's how I'm going to end well, because then you're not bitter about what you've done, because you've lived a great life every day. And I, probably some of that, how do you end well is, well, you don't want to be bitter about who you are or what you've done, so it's kind of interesting when you think about it that way, that if you're living well all the way through, you have the goals, you you set that up to be successful, then yeah, you're going to end happy, because all the way through you've accomplished and done things that get you there, that make you happy. So a lot of great stuff in here, man. I really appreciate it. And again, taking that with me, and I'm learning from you. So thank you.
Oh, very well said, Matt. I'm with you 100%. And courage is one of those things that's one of my highest values, because it holds all the other values intact. And to me, courage is just simply doing what you're afraid to do. And that has to be part of who we are. We have to do what we're afraid to do. That is so important. You don't grow otherwise. You won't be an entrepreneur. And honestly, you won't enjoy life a whole lot either, because everything's safe and it's just kind of milk toast and, that kind of thing. So, well said. Well said.
Yeah, the grit growth definition, the 4 virtues of grit, the very first one is valor. So that's
love it. That's why I love you guys. This is
right
great.
When
valor's number 1, valor, courage, you're on the right track.
That's it. Yeah. I couldn't make everything start with a C, but I could make everything start with a V. So I had to go valor, vigilance, viability, vigor. That's what we ended up with. But
that's awesome. Very memorable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground in a short period of time. No doubt.
We have. There was definitely nuggets in there that I'm going to take away myself and plop them down in the old journal right now as soon as we get done. So really appreciate it.
It's now Carson and I have to make the hard decision of which one thing are we going to do.
That's right.
So you've added value to us. So thank you.
Well, I hope so. I really do. You guys deserve it. You do a lot of good for others, and I'm happy to do anything I can do for you guys. So that's great.
Well, we really appreciate it. I'm sure we'll do this again at some point. I hope.
Sure, whatever works. And when you're big and famous, remember us little peons.
Appreciate that.
Thanks, Andy.
Okay. All right. Thanks,
guys. Well, have a great afternoon. Great talking with you.
You too. Appreciate it.
See you guys.
See ya.
Thank you for listening to the Grit Growth Podcast with host Carson Stefanelli and Matt Webster. We sincerely hope you were inspired by the interview and found at least one useful tool or tactic to implement in your own life. Now, level up by taking immediate action. Apply one lesson learned to your life as soon as possible to make sure it sticks. Post it and tag us to increase accountability. You can join the Grit Growth movement to restore American grit to its former glory by building an unprecedented force of conquerors, both in business and in life, at www.gritgrowth.org and wherever you're active on the socials. Please also drop a rating and review on your podcast app, as it goes a long way in helping the movement gain traction. Now, don't let this inspiration go to waste. Commit to conquer. Lead your life. Leave a legacy. Gather your grit and go get after it.